All right, I'd like to call to order the January 11th meeting of the Conestoga Valley School Board. Note that all are in attendance. If you could please join me to the pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, welcome everyone tonight to our meeting. And to all those watching online, if there is any there watching, welcome. Board, I need a motion to approve our agenda tonight. Moved. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. Dr. Z, any superintendent comments tonight?
Yes, Mr. President. Other than adding the superintendent comments item, so I can make this announcement, you'll notice a change on the agenda in the action discussion section. A new item F has been added, approval of Act 86 substitute teachers. This is normally a consent item under the superintendent's report for next week, but with the scarcity of substitutes we are currently experiencing, we need to get as many qualified substitute teachers into the classrooms as soon as possible. That's it, Mr. President. Thank you.
All right. Any board comments tonight? All right. Hearing none, we will move on. Officer Waltman, we would love to hear from you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, all right. So this is the year in review for 2020. Just some things about myself that you guys might have already known. Graduated from Slanco, graduated from York College. I've been with East Lamphere for 14 years now. I had previously done some bike officer stuff, which I still do over the summer, part of the crisis intervention team. Camp counselor with state police. Obviously, this is my 4th year here as the SRO. I had recently joined the Lancaster County CERT as a negotiator. And one thing that I was able to do in 2020 was the shop with the cop with state police. So I actually got to do something fun, this past year. All right, obviously school looked a little different this year. I did add kind of a funny picture there with the dog in the driver's seat. Kind of funny, it's all an Alzheimer's window there. But obviously we started the first day off of school. Again, looked a little different this year. And so I kind of focused on the 3 things here for my review. One is the activities, incidents, and then school safety. First we'll do activities. Part of the CV mentors, the student that I had mentored is now a senior, so that was one thing that I definitely wanted to stay until at least seeing him go through graduation. We did do a ride along. That is Brady. He is a senior now at Milton Hershey. He came back and we did a ride along over the summer. So that was one of the good things. I know it's kind of scarce. There wasn't too much that we were able to do last year, but we definitely got that in. I still assist with the virtual driver orientation. I try to get into the classrooms as much as I can with, question and answer sessions, especially with the driver's education and law. They usually invite me in. I also help out with lunch duties with all the schools. They did have a Valentine's dance last year, still able to attend that and assist. We'll see the middle school. TSA, also they were able to get that in first too. And that was, again, was at the middle school. We were able to get in the end of last year's basketball games and then obviously the football games, which I had attended as well. Community Helpers Day, I was able to get up to Leola this year. As soon as with their kindergartners, and then we kind of just discuss the community helpers. I get to read a book and show the kids a car. They like that kind of stuff. Graduation, we were there, I was there for the graduation, heard a lot of positive things about our graduation this year, so, and that was one thing that I don't normally get to attend, so that was kind of neat for me to actually see this year, is to get to see their graduation. This year I was able to get in and speak with the 7th and 8th graders, we talked about what it is to be a good community member, and they had some interesting questions, so. And that was, again, the shout with the cop. State police held that, right around Christmas time this past year. That was pretty neat to see the kids. Various trainings that we had there wasn't too many that I was able to attend. Usually I have a long list of the trainings that I was able to get into. Our department's really good at that, getting us the trainings that we need. But I was able to attend the civil disobedience training that was held at State Police at the Academy this year. And then every year we have to go through legal updates. So that is something that we have to do every year. I'm part of the crisis intervention team. That is members and officers that are trained. It's a 40-hour week of training, and then you have supplement training with that as well for anyone with mental health, addiction, people in some type of crisis like that. Negotiator, again, that was in 2019, so I have had a full year of being part of the team. Again, it's a 40-hour initial training. I was able to attend the FBI annual hostage negotiation seminar this past year. We also do a 40-hour training with the National Tactical Officers Association, NTOA. They also have virtual conference, which I was able to attend that as well. That was a good thing, as a lot of things were virtual, so we were still able to attend those. And then I ended up getting 8 hours a month, at least, at a minimum of training, again, each month for that. One of the great things that we have that we're able to offer any youth that have been arrested within East Lampeter is the Youth Aid Panel. It's a diversionary program. A lot of our students here are able to get through that, which I'm the liaison officer for, and I do really love that program. It's in the diversionary program. In case you're not familiar with it, I apologize for skipping ahead there, but it's a program that you can get into, community service, it's to seek rehabilitation, and then a lot of those kids will end up going through that, and then there's no charges attached to that. That's just like a community service type program. All right, so the incidents here, and we'll kind of break it down. Click it a bunch of times. So these are mainly the things that I'll deal with at the school: alarms, maybe EMS assists, information type reports. I'll help other agencies, crashes, disturbance, things like that. Also bound properties. And then it kind of goes in. So you'll see the difference. I just put them together within the schools from the 2019 to the 2020. Obviously, keeping in mind we were closed a couple of months there where the students weren't in the building. I should say closed, but they were not in the building. So some of the numbers kind of stayed the same, but then some actually had gone down. And the reason why some of those had gone down was alarms. I noticed with one of the schools, the alarms were actually a little bit less than what it normally would be, which might be contributing to us not being in the building. Out of those, with the 2020 incidents versus arrests, we got 4.4%, which is good. I mean, that's low. That's one of those things, like, we're able to push through the Youth Aid Panel and handle things that way. And then that's just a comparison from the 2019, so that was at 7.7% then. And then what I end up doing is I just kind of break it down a little bit. I try to clean it up a little this year, as far as, we got welfare checks, suspicious activity, and it says that's all the incidents. You'll see at the very end is kind of like an information. That could be anything, just that want to document at the school, we want to document it through the police department, so I usually put that under information. But you can kind of see some of the noise complaint, EMS, those types of incidents there. Middle school, same thing. And then the elementary schools will have, you'll see their alarms are usually the main thing why we show up. Brownstown's actually outside of East Lamphere Township, outside of the jurisdiction. So I know sometimes if they do call outside agency, which would be not their outside agency, but their agency, which would be West Earl Township, I wouldn't be notified of that. This is just something like going there as an SRO to assist would be the one for me. So school safety is another key point that obviously I'm involved with the response to violent intruder to RDI. I'll go to the schools every time they have any type of fire drill or their RDI drills, just to assist, observe. Traffic enforcement can get kind of scary on the road sometimes, but it makes it safer for the students to get in, especially during P-student testing. This is a fantastic program, honestly. I can't say anything bad about the Safe to Say. Being anonymous, I mean, now as a police officer, we deal with a lot of the crime watch. So our anonymous tipping through like crime watch is fantastic. So we see that as police officers. So to be able to have that at the school where anyone can send a tip in, we get notified right away. So all your admin will get notified, I'll get notified, we get email, we get a text. It's fantastic. And we can get to those students that need that help right away, which I do kind of contribute to why numbers have been coming down. We're able to stop some things before they happen, as far as getting them the help that they need. And does anyone have any questions about Safe to Say? Does anyone not understand how it works? Okay. So I'd be happy to explain. Every year, so Lancaster Lebanon has their Seatbelt challenge. So all the schools within Lancaster Lebanon that do want to participate, which I usually sign us up for, it's great to be able to get some type of money back, for safety. The thing is, they look for the biggest change from beginning to end, and I'm happy to report a lot of our kids wear their seatbelts. The times that I'm actually looking at it, sadly, is probably parents coming in without their seatbelts on, so I don't count that as just strictly for the kids. But it's great that the kids are wearing their seatbelts, at least in front of me coming into the school. And I'll normally take an unmarked car that day that I'm doing that. So. And then the safety task force, trying to help out with that in any way that I can. I did actually get up, so one thing I haven't done is actually get up onto the roof of the high school. I know it kind of sounds silly, but as police, we're looking at different angles in case there is any type of emergency situation. Just trying to figure out vantage points. So I did get up there. We did get to tour it with one of the staff, and it was amazing to at least see things from a different angle like that. I did have a sergeant come along with me too, and we were just kind of discussing different things. If there was an emergency, what we would do at this point. I coordinate all of the platoons. So we have 4 platoons within East Lamphere. A lot of the officers aren't familiar with the area when they come in and get hired. So one of the things I do like to coordinate, especially at this time of the year, when things are a little bit slower, especially when like a Sunday into Monday night, 1 o'clock in the morning when they're barely anyone's awake, they'll come in and they'll tour the schools. All of our officer vehicles have keys to the school to be able to come in for an emergency situation. And one of the great things is our sergeants will take them through, coordinate with the administration of that building just to let them know that they're coming in. They'll come in and just kind of learn the basic layout of the school. But I definitely think that's beneficial because sometimes you get turned around, you don't know where you're at. We also taught a lot of different exercises, like tabletop exercises back at our station, and I'm involved with a lot of that. And just thank you to everyone. I know Law Enforcement Appreciation Day was on Saturday, and again, they decorated my office as they did last year, so I appreciate all the support, and working well with the school is amazing. I don't think a lot of people realize that relationship and what all you can learn from that. Does anyone have any questions? I know it's kind of breezing through there.
So no, I just want to echo from our perspective. Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you,
I
sir.
think it continues to be something super important, and I think it's has the kids familiar with what a police officer looks like, but it doesn't always have to be a bad thing when they see a police officer. So, and to have someone in the school that cares about our students and cares about the kids,
Thank you.
it's great. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, this is the first time in our meeting for public comments. Don't see any public here comment. So, I believe Don and Wes, you guys are here to talk about the change orders for the.
Thank you, Todd. Okay, I have 3 change orders to present this evening. They all fall under the civil category. We had hoped to have Mark Krowski here, who's the civil engineer, but he is under quarantine, so I will give you a 10,000-foot overview, and if we need to drill down on any items, Phyllis and I discuss getting them here either next week or next month. That being said, the first 2 change orders on your summary were related to changes required in the documents by DEP. I believe I also included the narratives. It's a multitude of items. That one is an add and one is a credit, but it generally nets out to a $13,000 credit, roughly. And then the last one on there is the deletion of the impervious liner of the rain garden. That's due to us changing how we approach the stormwater management on the site. We are now infiltrating that stormwater, allowing it to infiltrate per DEP comments again, and obviously an impervious liner does not facilitate that, so that would be eliminated in the rain garden. And that is approximately $16,000 credit, which totals out to a $29,582.62 credit overall amongst the 3 change orders.
You keep coming back with stuff like that, we're going to be happy with you all.
There you go, John. I'll give it my best.
Any questions for Wes? All right.
Thank you.
That'll be on consent.
Yep. All right. Wes.
It's great to have a podium tonight. I have a place to put all my papers. Mrs. Martin got tired of me fumbling around. All right, so as you know, this is the start of our budget process. And so some of these slides I'm going to kind of go through quickly because they're really there just kind of for your reference. So you can look at the data on your own and then kind of focus on some of the meat of it a little bit more. So Dr. C, if we could back up just to that slide for a minute. Budget timeline, you can see where we are. One of the things that we will be preparing for you for next week, since we're in this preliminary budget phase, are the notices and the resolutions to move forward with the display of the preliminary budget and then ultimately the action in February. So the only other option really is to pass that resolution we talked about last month to opt to go have a budget that would be within the index. By going to the preliminary budget, we can still do that. But if you decided for whatever reason that you wanted to adopt that resolution, you're just gonna need to let us know, because we'd have to come back with that one next week. That means we would skip the preliminary budget process in February. So next slide is just a review of the Act 1 index and where we are, I covered this before, although last month you did ask me about the special education exception. So the document is attached in Board Docs and the dollar amount is there, and then I add the new mill numbers and percent increase if we were to do that onto the slide so that you have it. Next slide, this one is really just a placeholder, so I was kind of trying to save you from having to go back into May or June and see what we did last year and kind of pick up where we left off. So I just wanted you to have it there as a reminder when we were closing down the 2021 budget. You know, we were sort of in the middle of COVID, and we're not really sure what we were going to expect as far as what it was going to look like from a revenue and expense standpoint. So when we sort of get into the details of the numbers, you're going to see some things look really squirrely, and that's because, you know, we only were here for part of a year, and so some of those expenses carried through and other ones did not. So Dr. Z, if you want to go to the next slide, the reason I put the previous one in there so you could go back and say, okay, what did we say we thought was going to happen? So what we thought was going to happen was that we were going to see decreases both in the real estate and the earned income, as well as in interest income on the revenue side. That didn't happen quite the way we thought it might, which isn't bad news, that's good news. So we did have a little bit of growth in the real estate number, but unfortunately sort of the flip side to that is the assessment appeals are underway. I've said that to you previously. We are looking, going into next year's budget, starting out about $500,000 behind due to those assessment appeals. But we are continuing to go through the appeal process with those, and certainly keep you posted as we get the appraisals and continue to move through the process. Another good piece was the earned income tax was not hit quite as hard as we'd originally projected. Unfortunately, that's not so much a result of the earned income tax itself. It's a result of the type of jobs that were hit by that. So there was certainly a lot of job loss in Lancaster County, but the job loss tended to be in those lower wage jobs, which didn't affect the earned income tax nearly as much. And then if we go to the next slide, talk about some of the challenges. So one of the things we were not thinking is that, you know, certain venues would be closed as long as they have been. So you'll see when we get to the numbers that assessment tax really took a hit this year. As a matter of fact, I think despite an $80,000 or $90,000 projection that we have in there, our year-to-date revenue in that is only about $23,000, and we're well over halfway through the year. And it's simply a result of so many of those venues having to be closed or at such low capacity that they just have not been able to have the gate receipts, which is what goes into that tax. Rental revenue also took a hit. That one should probably bounce back, you know, as we start to open up and allow folks to rent our facilities again. And then sort of flipping to the expense side, some of the things that we thought we were going to see on the expense side were things like, you know, increased transportation costs, increased supply costs, things like that. What we are now seeing is a little bit of a different gamut there as well. Whether it's because of pent-up demand or just people are sicker, not really sure what exactly is going on yet. We've sort of been following the healthcare claim numbers, but our healthcare costs are definitely up. When we look at the year-to-date numbers that we're experiencing this year, they're higher than anything we've seen in the past 5 years. So definitely concerned about what that number looks like at this point, and how that's, again, going to project into the next year. We've talked about special education costs. I have a chart to actually show you that one. But again, those costs continue to be not as steep as a decline as we've seen in the past. I'm sorry, steep as an incline as we've seen in the past, but still increasing nonetheless. Actually just in the fall, we talked to you a little bit about sort of this dual effect of our Conestoga Valley virtual academy costs. So it's been great that we've been able to move kids to virtual and have that program offering, because we've had that 9 or 10 years, other districts have not. There's certainly a cost associated with that that's above and beyond what we would have in a normal year's budget.
costs are up, we've shown those to you. And then the other side of that is the outside cyber charters. So as frustrating as these costs may be, it's actually a good scenario for us in that we have seen less kids move to an outside cyber placement. They've come to CVVA instead. So the costs are less than they could potentially be, but still, $500,000 in costs on either side totals about $1 million, obviously, and it makes it difficult to make a budget work. Then if we go to the next slide, just to give you an idea, I usually put this in here just so you know what our assumptions are kind of going into the 2021-22 budget. So we are really seeing kind of flat assessed value growth. I have a chart that shows you that, and that's kind of historically been the case for us. We sort of went flat in that after the 08, 09, 9, 10 crisis, we've never really sort of gotten into a nice, healthy year-to-year growth since then. And then when we look at the appeals and kind of calculating that in, it does look like we're going to have to kind of hold the line on the assessed values, which obviously makes it hard to continue to increase revenue side there when it's a multiplication of the two factors and it's not increasing. I'm projecting right now for a flat subsidy coming out of the state. Time will tell whether that's going to be the case or not. Governor's budget will be released at the beginning of February, and when we have the February board meeting, I'll go through those numbers with you. And I'm going to sort of skip the federal piece for a minute because I have a slide I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more specifically, and then you can see the expense assumptions on that as well. And then, as I said, next slide, please. Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about these federal funds. Kind of had this all ready to go, and then obviously, we had some new legislation that was passed, so I had to kind of come back and revisit this. So this particular slide came out of the June presentation that I did for you. So when you see the new federal money out of the Consolidated Act, you're going to notice that the first 12 items are exactly what they were in the prior relief effort from the federal government. And then the next slide, I did purposely put these in red so they sort of stood out a little bit. These are the new uses, so certainly they're there for you to read. I don't need to read them to you, but you can see they have tried to expand based upon some of the things they've heard from school districts across the country to allow for some other uses of those funds. So the real question is, okay, well, that's great, but how much money is it? So what we had been told originally to estimate was to take about 4 times our CARES money. If you've been following our presentations, it's a little over $1 million. And so, 4 times that is well over $4 million. And the promise has been that they're going to push 90% out of it out to K through 12 schools. So if that's the case, we would be getting $4 million from the federal government through the new consolidated appropriation. The other good part to it is the original discussion was that money would need to be used by September 30th of 2022, and they're pushing that date to September 30th of 2023. That's particularly helpful to us because I think if you talk to any of us as administrators, we will tell you that a lot of the costs that we think we're going to see are not going to be just going into next year. They're going to bleed into the following year. So for us to be able to kind of maybe sit on some of that money until we need it for the next year is, we think, going to be very helpful to making not just next year's budget work, but then the following year as well. So a couple of things just before I move on where we kind of think we are obviously going to see challenges going forward are going to be in that continued loss of real estate revenue. So I had said before, we do have assessment appeals for next year, but absolutely believe in 6 months we're going to see a whole new round of appeals for the following year. So that number is going to be a challenge. The transportation subsidy at the state level, I'll talk about that a little bit more specifically later. I think, and Dr. Mann's here, but we've sort of been talking internally about those CVVA and outside cyber numbers, and believe that we will see some group of kids come back when we're able to all get vaccinated and get back in school. in a real live environment, but there will be some that will choose and want to choose that virtual environment going forward. So we don't believe you're just going to flip a switch and everybody's going to come back. So we are trying to kind of plan for that. And then finally, whether it be regular education kids who need remediation or special education kids, Sarah has been just kind of starting, kicking off, looking at what COVID compensation we will need to provide for those kids, and obviously that's going to be an expense driver as well. So then to dive into the revenues, the first chart really, and I normally show you this chart, but I don't usually put last year's actual numbers on it. I kind of go because the 2028, which is the form the state makes us use, really shows you your prior year budget to your budget that you're proposing. But I thought it was helpful in this year. Now, again, this is sort of a double-edged sword because we weren't in school, in physical school all year last year, so some of these numbers look a little bit goofy. But I think to show the whole picture, it's a little helpful to have that extra column there. So in this chart, you're going to see really that the effect of the amusement tax really sticks out pretty clearly there. The delinquent tax number probably isn't the greatest number from an accuracy standpoint yet, because we literally at this time of year are running the reports and turning the delinquent taxes over for the prior fall. So you'll actually be doing that, voting on that in consent agenda next week. So we'll have a little bit better idea, not so much what the revenues are going to be, but at least be able to show you the turnover number and how that compares to prior years, which should give you some good information. Just a note, in this revenue number for the real estate tax for 21-22, we do not have any index in there yet. So if you're thinking, well, that number doesn't look like it is as high as it should be, it's because we have not put any tax increase into it for this presentation. And then the state and federal numbers really look sort of a little bit out of whack, and that's because obviously all the grant money that we've gotten so far through either the federal CARES program for ESSER or the PCCD grant are all flowing through there. And then the next slide, I had mentioned assessed value. I mean, I can't really show you any better than this, how flat it is. Certainly that one little bump is the year we went into reassessment. So, the assessed values went up, the millage rate came down, but we have been super flat for a long time. And then on the expense side, again, just to hit a couple of the numbers there. So I talked to you already about that healthcare number, so you can see it there, and that's a pretty simplistic 8% trend that we were looking at for 21-22. But I'll tell you where we're running today, we're going to hit that number. So definitely a concern there. And then again, to what I said before about where we really thought, and this is where you can clearly see that we thought we were going to have additional expense in transportation, that we were going to have additional expense in general supplies, and then we certainly knew we were going to have additional expense in equipment because we bought those devices that we needed to make the virtual program work. And some of that came to fruition. We definitely see the increase in supplies and are projecting that much of that will maintain going into the 21-22 budget. Not so much from a PPE standpoint, but from the virtual program standpoint. The equipment, hopefully we can kind of bring back down to where we would normally be now that we've got the devices. Transportation, probably not as much of a hit, to the expense side because we haven't had to add vehicles, but we're definitely going to see it on that tuition side with those outside cybers. Again, not thinking that all of those kids are coming back. And then certainly have, contractual cost increase for things like special ed, SOS, STS, those sorts of things. And then a bunch of those items that I mentioned to you, the healthcare, retirement things that are big drivers in our budget. So you can just sort of look at the numbers and say, yep, it's salaries, it's retirement and benefits, it's healthcare. The next series of charts, Dr. Z, if you just kind of slowly want to just page through them, I'm just going to tell you what they are and not going to spend time on them. So the first one in each group kind of gives you a history that's come out of Forecast 5, a great piece of software to be able to show some of this stuff. The next one then shows actually what the cost is in comparison to the subsidy we get from the state. So ultimately, if the state were footing the whole bill, you'd see those bars would be at the same spot, and they're not. And then I tried to end with a slide that shows the projection of where we see the costs going, kind of sort of the trend line. And one of the good things that I mentioned is this retirement number, this PSERS number is leveling out. I mean, it's leveling out at 35%, but it certainly is at least leveling out. Healthcare, the same one, showing you history and then showing you projections. Special ed is after that, showing you that cost versus subsidy on that one as well. And then a history that has the 21-22 estimate. And then eventually here we're going to get to the cyber charter tuition summary, and I did highlight that number at the bottom. So that's the number that Dr. Mann and I talked to you about in October. At that point it was $986,000. Now we're looking at $1.2 million. So that number is just growing on us this year, rightfully so, but making it difficult to fund other things in the budget. And then the debt service chart that's there, we did actually make one small adjustment to this chart where we added in the cash that we're going to need in 2023, so you can truly see the level of debt service that we will have going forward. So bottom line, when we look at all the budget requests for 21-22, total revenue of around $71 million, total expense of about $77, so we're about $6 million off. That, if you think kind of recent history, that's a pretty big difference. We sort of run in the $3.5 million range is where we start. But it's not unheard of. Back in, I think it was 17-18 was the last time we were kind of in that same $6 million deficit boat. Sort of the challenge back then was fitting the PSERS, additional PSERS payments in that were, $1 million a year. So, and we had assigned a fund balance to deal with that. So that number was probably not as high as it seemed. But just to give you an idea, so last year we kind of did a similar chart where we showed you the Act 1 index coming out. PSERS and the HSA are based off of what the cost increase is from year to year. So I don't just pick a number, I actually have a methodology behind that. So our $3.9 million number was 2.1 last year when we got to the end. So the next slide then, what are we going to do going forward? I was actually hoping that difference would be a little bit smaller and we would have, I wouldn't say an easy job, but we would sort of know kind of where we need to get to. Obviously it's large, and so, we're going to have a series of meetings internally with department heads and principals to try to see what we can pull out of the budget. And as time goes on and the current year data becomes more available and we sort of get more months under our belt, we're able to refine the numbers and hopefully we'll get some positives there. As you noticed in December, we did not show you any new staffing because we're not proposing any because we can't fit any in when you have a budget deficit that looks like that. So we'll be looking through the items that were submitted. We'll be looking through waiting for retirements. We've already got a couple of those coming in, so waiting to see who's in that pot, and then we'll have to do the hard work of what the other possible reductions will be. Unknowns going forward, certainly not knowing this coming summer what additional appeals we're going to get from real estate side. Certainly, as well as I do living here, the retail industry, the restaurants, the hotels are all struggling. So hopefully we got a light at the end of the tunnel, but that's definitely going to affect that tax base as well as we'll have to see what the recovery on the amusement tax looks like. I'm hoping that, flat is the worst case scenario at the state level, but we'll hopefully get a picture of that at the beginning of the month with the governor's budget. We already talked about the federal piece. One of the things we're going to do on the federal side is try to sit down internally and again try to look at what those costs are that we believe are going to continue to be out there into the following year. And we'll have to go back to that list and say what can we use the money against and try to put a plan together that we can show you there. And then on the expense side, I think I've hit all of those before, so I don't think I need to repeat them. So at the very end of the day, new average single family residence, and this is just an average, and it's just a single family. Certainly we have other types of residences in our district. $213 $13,000. So the 3% index would increase taxes by about $90 or about another $15 if we went up to the 3.5% that the special ed exception would give us. And then the last chart really is just the history of the Act 1 index that I've shown you before. So that's it for presentation. Again, I'll take questions, but that would be what the preliminary budget would look like. You have everything attached as far as our normal 5-year projection spreadsheet, so you can see the effects in the out years, as well as special ed exception, and we're showing you the numbers on the form that the PD requires us to use. On that form, you are going to see that we have assumed both the index and the exception. We have to do that because it's kind of part of the process. You can't make an argument that you need to file for an exception if you don't show that you actually need the exception. So even though I don't have those numbers in the real estate number here in the presentation, they are in that other document as well. And we would come back again next week with the notice and the resolution, and then in February we lay everything public, allow for the public to ask questions or respond, and then come back in February and actually do the formal approval of the preliminary budget.
I have a question. Where does the millage for our construction debt service get laid into the budget?
So it's kind of hard to show you. Did you close the presentation? Yeah, Dave, if you could go to the expense, the one that had, yep, and pull that up. So down at the bottom where it says fund transfers debt service, that's the almost $6 million number.
And so the millage increase in the tax rate generates that?
No, we generate that number and then it goes the other way. Then we derive the millage number from that. Are you asking me how Scott does it when he does his millage study?
Actually, I'm asking kind of as a homeowner, when we see this increased millage for the proposed budget, is that also in addition to the 0.16 mils that the construction?
No, so it's all in there. These are all the expenses for the budget. So if you pull up the Excel spreadsheet that shows the summary and then the revenues and the expenses, there's actually a tab in there that says debt service. And you can kind of look at that one, and that's probably the better way to see it. But what you'll see is we pull that number over into this line item. So it's all included, is the answer to your question. And you'll actually see, if you go the whole way to the bottom of that tab, you will see where we've added in how Scott talked to us about we have to add that additional millage in to kind of get up to the run rate. You will see that in there. Any other questions? Okay. Ken is next. Yeah, he's going to talk about the capital X.
Excuse me. Hello. Hi, Ken. Same list that I presented the other month. A lot of it is looking to replace water coolers that we're currently not using in any of the buildings, except for Brownstone because they're new with bottle fillers, and replacing them with a bottle filler station. One of the caveats that we've looked at before is if some of this other money comes in from these grants and these other funds, is we would utilize some of that to pay for those type items. Other things, we're going to do some drive-in rifles repairs at Leola and the middle school, and then a roof replacement and restoration on the building that's beneath the press box out at the stadium. So that's through a lot of digging. We So it would be definitely cheaper in that aspect for us. But I really haven't been able to find any documentation in our archives that show when it was actually replaced. So or it could actually go back to when that building was constructed. So sometimes our archives are full of information that's good, and other times it's hit and miss. So other than that, the other project we're looking to do is replace the hot water heaters at Leola. So currently we're limping along on one, but if we're monitoring it basically on a daily basis, it's doing okay, but I don't like to be running just on one. I need some redundancy. So, and this would move us to a similar installation that we did at Brownstown, where it's a hot water boiler that then puts it into a storage tank. So your typical hot water heater, the way they fail, is at the burners and then the tank rots out and then it goes. Well, this isn't. It's not a combination unit like you have in your house, which is what we currently have in several of the buildings. This is actually an individual hot water boiler, and then that pushes the water into an actual storage tank. So we've had a system like this here in high school since 2004. So it's been doing fine for us here. So, it actually gives us 2 water tanks and 2 boilers. So we have that redundancy. So really the whole building can operate off of one, but it has that capacity there to handle both. Any questions about the list or the items on the list?
I was amazed originally how short the list was.
Yes.
Last year, our list was like 3 pages with various laid out, which got the highest priorities. So my question, and I went back to look at that. It's hard to compare. My general question just is, of all those things we had on last year's list, some of them we usually have to put a low priority. Where do we stand in general between what we knew we needed to get done, what we got done, and what's left to be done?
I can wrap that up and get that information to you.
Well, I don't need the detail. I guess what I want to know is about this from last year. Was most of that?
Most of it was completed, but I can give you a summary in comparison of where we were with that list, and just I'll have that for you for next week.
I'm not sure. Sometimes I'm not always sure how far down the priorities we get to go any one year, and I don't know if the buildings being closed and activities being down, if there was less wear and tear, if that made any difference.
Oh, it didn't hurt. But
I just want to make sure that we're keeping up so that we don't end up where it costs more to do it a year or 2 from now than it costs to do now.
correct. Yeah. Pound prevention is that whole saying. So
Okay.
I'm going to screw it up if I promise it.
I just want to make sure that we don't have any major.
Pound prevention, pound cure, right?
I'm sure we're not putting off something that's really
I agree.
ought to be addressed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You'll see attached the CTC budget for 21-22. Dr. Savin and his staff did a great job. Overall, it's a 2.29% increase spread among all the participating districts. We have currently 64 full-time students and 44 part-time students attending CTC at one of the 4 campuses. Our current share is $932,000, and it's going to jump up about $200,000 to $1.1 million. And if you'd like, I'd like to bring Dr. Savin in maybe for a board retreat, maybe just so he can share some of the things that are going on at the CTC. But again, he did a great job. He and his administrators did a great job in setting up the budget for this year. With only a 2.29% increase.
Any comments, John?
No. I think he said it well.
Any questions for Dave? Did everybody enjoy that? hear Dr. Savin come?
I'm sorry.
Would we enjoy hearing Dr. Savin come and talk to us at some point?
Yeah, in the past, we've had board meetings and retreats at one of the locations. I always like those, I always like those tours. I don't know how many people in the board now were ever part of that. Because it was really good when Brownstown had its restaurant going, because
Right.
I've got a meeting with the other superintendents and Dr. Savin scheduled this week. So I will touch base with him after that.
I don't know how many of us have had any of the tours. I don't know if I've been to all three necessarily, but I always think it's worthwhile. I remember the past complaints that would be a cost for to send it to the CTC, but I think it is well worth it.
When you see it, when you see it, what do you do?
Yeah,
When you
yes, and I think our numbers are growing right now, aren't they? The numbers
They're all
of
good.
students, I think that's a good thing.
All right, so I'll go up for approval for consent next week. Okay. I'll let you review this. Phyllis?
So one easy one and one a little more complicated tonight. 713 was what was our vandalism policy. Hasn't been touched in a while, and I actually wish Heather would have stuck around because we had a discussion sort of between Heather and Ken and I about this policy, because when we did the research, what Mrs. Martin kept finding was not necessarily a vandalism policy, but a protection of property policy that other districts have adopted. And what it really does is kind of brings vandalism and trespassing together. We've not ever had trespassing in our policy, so I wanted to make sure that by adding the language, we weren't going to kind of do something to either make Heather's life more difficult, or what we were doing was in line with kind of how she would treat those situations. The first part of the policy, which is the vandalism, is really just sort of cleaning some language up. But you will see this whole new section then that deals with trespassing. And I did run it by Heather. It actually very similar language from two other policies that we looked at, kind of getting into the trespassing. And she said everything that is in the policy is really referenced in the crimes code. So basically, the whole issue with trespassing, as I'm sure you know, is you have to make sure that people are on notice when they are and aren't allowed to be on property. So we're going to have to make sure our signage is good. And then if we have folks trespassing, we sort of need to document that. We need to make sure they're aware. And then, should the situation continue, then she can take the steps that she needs to take to move it forward. So it looks like a big change to our policy, but it's really just adding that section. If you have questions about it that I can't answer, again, I may need to touch base back with Heather, since that's kind of where we started, but we are recommending, thought it would be a good idea to include that in our policy. And then the other policy, which actually we didn't have a lot of changes to, was the IPM, the pest management policy. This policy is very, very standard, because the rules and regulations behind applying pesticides and the notices you have to get are specific. So really the only change we made was to the end, and again, it was just sort of cleaning up some language. It didn't read quite, I think, the way I had to read it about 4 times to make sure I understood what it said, so we just tried to clean that up. Not any other major changes to that policy.
Phyllis?
Yes.
Back to policy 713. It just seems to me that what used to be guideline 713.3, 4, basically the immediate response, required reporting, follow-up, and prevention strategies. That all seems like administrative regulations, not policy.
Yeah, I simply didn't touch it because it was in there, and so this board has been, I think, so prescriptive about making sure that guidelines isn't in policy. I guess I kind of thought maybe there was a reason you all wanted it there, but if there's not, we can certainly pull it out and slim it down.
Well, it was last reviewed in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So, over a decade, I think we can clean some of that up. It does not fit the, what is clearly policy, and the new material, which is clearly, there's an awful lot here that just looks like administrative regulation that doesn't.
Would you be okay if we simply used the headers and said, you know, we're going to take immediate response, have reporting procedures, and then have follow-up activities and kind of maybe just do it in a sentence or two? Or you want it gone completely?
I think it's understood when you say your administrative guidelines, that they are comprehensive.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be that line, the superintendent or designate will ensure that guidelines are enforced upon.
If you want to be picky, you could say appropriate guidelines, I mean, they have to be comprehensive, but I don't think it's ever a good reason why we want that policy.
Okay, we'll clean that up.
And do we want prevention strategies gone also, or just the steps that we follow?
We'll take a look at that one,
Okay,
because some of that is generic enough that it's not,
it is,
it doesn't say what the access
correct.
procedures are. So we'll come back with a cleaned up version next week.
Okay. And then I think the next item on the agenda is the rec plan, correct? So that's me too. Mr. Smucker and I have been, oh my goodness, 2 or 3 years now, I guess, right? A part of a joint effort with the townships on a comprehensive parks and recreation plan. And so kind of having a consultant come in and work with the group to get to the point where there is now the rec plan that you've seen and approved. The next step in that is the township would like to apply for a grant out of DCNR, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. That would be a $10,000 grant to start to implement some of the park and recs actions that were identified in the plan. That grant needs a $1,000 match, and so the township is asking for each of us to basically cover a third, so $300, $333 to be exact. Somebody else will pick up the other dollar. And what the intent of it is that then they would participate in the Circuit Rider Grant Program with the intent that they would be able to establish a director of Parks and Recreation position within East Lampeter Township, and then that the fees of the program would actually pay for that position. So they're not intending to come back to us for any of that down the line. But these grant applications get a little more weight if you've got all the parties involved sort of signed on. So Mr. Hutchison asked if we would, one, be willing to do it, and two, you have the grant application and the resolution. So if you're okay with that, we'll bring the resolution back to you next week on consent and ask for your approval, and then just know that we'd be on the hook for the $333.
The original documents we got on this was a 200-page.
Yes.
I don't have that particular, but I do have my notes. And I asked at the time if they would be coming back to us for any money at all, and they said no. This was just to have our name on there. I know this isn't a lot of money, but they can take it out of our TIF money, they can take it out of our permeable surface money. I see no reason to nickel diamonds for this, small though it is. And again, you said, no, they will be coming back again. That's what they told us the last time.
Any other questions?
So I've heard this described as a application fee. I've heard it described as a match. Which is it? If we don't get the grant, we get the money back,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
And it's not an application fee. It's a,
Yeah, it was described to us at the meeting that it's the $1,000 is the match to the $10,000 grant. Okay, that's
decision
Yeah.
before we move on.
Correct. I was kind of thinking the same thing, because that's comments that, what does this board feel? We would agree that it would go on, the resolution would go on consent agenda.
You're going to have to.
If we would agree, yes, the resolution would go on the consent agenda for next week. Comments from the board? John, any thoughts since you're part of this?
I think it's not a big deal to pay $333 to keep the process moving forward. I understand your concerns.
I also noticed they now have us listed as a financial contributor. If you look at the paperwork they gave us, this is a general financial or technical organization, and we're included under financial. I just get a little antsy about that after they said, they only needed us to have our name on there. So, it was obvious we had, cooperation. Just a door I felt strange over. But I agree, it's not a lot.
I think it's a good direction to continue to go in, so. I don't hear any other objection, I'm gonna recommend that we have it on consent agenda. Okay. Those that can be on the consent agenda. Dr. Z, any comments about your?
Just as I mentioned earlier, superintendent comments, we're gonna ask for approval tonight for the 4 teachers, the 4 student teachers to be able to substitute teach for us effective tomorrow with a positive vote from the board.
So with that, board, I'll take a motion. We want these substitute teachers.
Move to approve the hires recommended by the superintendent.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm sorry,
Hires require roll call vote.
they're allowed to substitute for 20 days. Work for SCS, so they can't sub for more than 10 days in any one placement. And then it's renewed annually, so if they're school to teaching next year, for whatever reason.
Start this conversation.
Next was the architect discussion, just for a recap for anybody listening out there. On October 30th, the district sent out a request for proposal for an architect to continue the work on the currently planned renovation projects. We received 14 proposals that we screened, resulting in bringing 5 of those firms in for interviews. From the 5 interviews, we selected 3 firms on which we conducted reference checks. And based upon interviews and the reference checks, the administration is recommending that we retain Murata, Maine to continue working on the district's planned projects, namely the renovations of the existing middle school and the renovation to Leola Elementary. While both Beers and Hoffman and the Schrader Group were high quality firms, we do not believe they offer a substantial improvement in services to Murata, Maine. We would expect Murata, Maine to continue to minimize change orders through effective communication, consistently focus on attention to detail to eliminate errors of omissions, work effectively with contractors, construction manager, and the district to construct and renovate buildings that match our instructional model while recognizing financial constraints.
All right, board, so last week or last month, we did not move anywhere on this conversation. We need to have a decision whether or not we decide to have an architect record or not. We need to at least agree on an architect to continue the renovation projects that we have kind of out in front of us. At this point in time, we don't have an architect in place to do that. So I'm opening the table for discussion as to what direction we go, because at this point in time, we don't have one.
So we've gone round and around this discussion. I'm ready to make a motion. I will move that we take on the services that we hired Ron Main for this project.
I have a couple of questions.
to the move forward, just because I wasn't involved, and so when we talked at the last meeting, I think that was the first I was hearing, just more of the collective feedback and just trying to mull that over because I have no experience with architects and so that's just not an area of strength for me. But I just had two questions based on what you said. One was you had said we didn't think that the other two would offer any substantial improvement. I was curious if you could expand on that just a little in light of the fact that we had heard, some major complaints along the way. So what?
Yeah, I think the term major complaints is a subjective term. In speaking to other districts about Marana, Maine, the Schrader Group, and Beers and Hoffman, each of the districts had issues throughout the construction project, which is normal in any, whether it's construction or renovation. It's how it was resolved in the end is what seemed to be that the differences were not that great. So when I said that there's no substantial increase or improvement, that's what I mean. It seems like there's going to be issues no matter who you have. It's how you can work through those issues as an administrator to construction or board to construction.
And then along with that, like what you had also mentioned that the improvements that we want Marana Maine to make, what has been done to help us actually believe that will happen?
And I think the communication that has been going on between the new middle school especially, and with Ben and with Fred, our construction manager, has been open. And John, you made the comment about the change orders coming back at $30,000 to our credit. That's because they're digging into that and they're working with the engineer to make sure that happens. I would also say that with Brownstown, as that's been wrapping up, we've been able to have a united front to go after the two contractors that are not carrying their weight and to make sure that those last minute punch list items are taken care of.
I still contend that we really haven't done what I call due diligence. Usually when we have an architect, this is often looked at as one big project, three pieces. The fact that we felt we needed to go out again halfway through suggested there were some problems. And I understand that we always have some problem with architects or contractors, no matter what. But it's the type of them that you have and the severity that matters. And when the committee interviewed, we actually came up with two finalists. And then suddenly it switched course and we dissolved and never finished our discussion. And the final decision then went out of the board's hands, and I don't know that I'm comfortable that we're following the impression that the members that were there during the interviews actually had. Even the report that we got, there's 4 or 5 problems, and why we would say if there's a problem, and why we would have gone through that entire process if it wasn't a problem. And this firm did not come up in our 2 finalists, was added later. Makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Was there a recommendation from the interviewing group? I don't feel that I ever heard that.
I feel like if I recall correctly, at least anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, that yes, out of the interviews, we had Beers, Hoffman, and Schrader. But because we couldn't settle on one of those, Marana was also still in the conversation, and so as they went back and did their reference checks and everything on Beers and Hoffman and Schrader, we're also asked the administration to give us an understanding of what the issues were in greater detail with Marana, and as those conversations took that's why the recommendation came back as it did. Am I right or wrong? That's correct. Okay. Does anybody else?
Yeah, I don't think when we were done with the interview that we were overwhelmed with either of the other two candidates. And we're like, if we're not overwhelmed with them and we're not overly excited about these people, why switch? That was the conversation, the way I remember it.
Well, we did come up with two finalists. We've all been through a lot of these interviews, and it is not unusual for half a dozen of us to be in an interview and then come up with our impressions. You think we were all different interviews, but one person thought it was a strong point, another person thought, and the way we always dealt with it, due diligence, was to talk it out, and that's where we started. And we went around the table once, and everyone gave which of the two they liked better. I did not get the impression, and this is mine, that anyone thought they were just barely average or so-so. I thought the people that spoke, each person had a good reason for their preference of one of those two. And we were split. And from my perspective and experience, that's when you go and you continue to talk it out till you find out which of the assets you think are the most important for picking between those two. And we didn't. We just stopped cold and left. And we were told, well, they would do references and get back to us. And in effect, we were simply liquidated. We stopped existing as a committee. Nothing ever came back to us. And I don't think we ever really worked through that first discussion when we veered left. And to me, that's not due diligence.
Any other comments from the committee that was there? Otherwise, we have a motion on the table to continue on with Murata.
I think what we got was a recommendation from administration, not a recommendation.
What we got was a recommendation from administration, not a recommendation from the interviewing group, which included both board and administration.
So what we have before us is one side of that, not the other side.
So I would agree that we did not move off the mark
After requesting the reference checks.
Well, if we want to have a discussion, then now's our time to discuss. I think part of the reason when we left that meeting with Murata Main still in the mix was because we weren't all in favor of one or the other, recognizing the things that John has already said and the things that the administration has already said. So, although I agree that we didn't necessarily come to a conclusion as a group. So we've had a couple meetings now where I've asked for us to discuss. We don't discuss. We just kind of sit here.
Well, part of the problem is half of us were not there.
Understand?
So what you're getting is where I may have heard something from one firm that I was impressed with or not impressed with, someone else wasn't. And usually that's what we talk out when we're split. We sit there and try to decide which is the most important aspects of what we've seen. And we can even try to do that.
Well, I think we had a discussion that night, and we couldn't come to an agreement that night. We said, all right, let's see what the administration finds. That's where we ended.
I don't remember saying we'll do what the administration
We
wants.
didn't, that's not what I said. I said, let's let the administration dig into it and find out what they find.
And they said they would get back to us, which they did.
And they did. They came back to us with a recommendation.
They came back to the whole board.
They came back to the whole board.
I understood that to mean they would come back to us and we would hash that out. But But even what they came back to us with lists all the problems that they think they're going to have to handle. I don't understand saying that something is not happening. I'm trying to figure out why I spent 2 nights listening to interviews.
Well, I think we spent 2 nights listening to interviews because we were open to, because we thought we might find something different, and we didn't. We didn't find anything that was like, oh my goodness, they're so good, let's go with them. That's where we ended.
Well, that's how you feel we ended. I thought I found better. I don't know how the other people in the committee did, but I felt we were in a discussion where we found 2 that we liked, and we were discussing them. And for a while, that's all we were discussing, was our 2 findings. I leave it to the board to decide how to handle this. I just still feel the same. We do have a motion on the floor. Do you have a second?
Yeah.
Well, I will say, I don't feel like I can support the motion for a candidate that was not one of the top 2.
So if we don't proceed, then my recommendation is gonna be that we bring Beardsley back in, we bring Schrader back in, we bring Maratame back in, and I'm gonna require that the entire board is here for our meeting. Listen,
Good luck.
that's where we're at right now. I mean, I will second John's motion. If I'm allowed to, I'm allowed to, right? So I will second John's motion. And so with that, roll call is gonna start with Dana.
No.
Yes,
Yes.
no.
No.
And I. So it's 5-4 in favor of Ron. Good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's see. All right, where do you have your tentative agenda in front of you for next week's meeting? Make note that the meeting is on Tuesday, not on Monday. This is our second time in our meeting for public comments. You guys have comments from the public here, so are there any board matters tonight?
I had one request. There's an organization called Education Voters. We've worked with them before. Several years ago, I remember presenting for them. They are starting again with some advocacy on focusing on cyber school legislation. They got in touch with me, and they are interested if anyone would like to participate on the 7th. Well, almost today, so it's too late. On the 17th, they'll have a Zoom sort of training to do advocacy for this issue. They're interested in anyone, board members, staff, for those that are listening in. They even would like to have parents and community people. If you're interested in helping in this advocacy, legislative advocacy with the new legislature in Harrisburg, get in touch with me and I'll connect you with the right people.
Anything else from the board? All right, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn to executive session for legal and personnel